By the time this video comes out, I will likely have received my physical copy. Spoiler alert, I played this game before it came out in the West. No, I did not get a review copy. No, I do not have a friend who works at Best Buy. No, I did not stream the game before the global release. I just got the Japanese version, which came out a bit earlier. But the most important version for me is the physical copy, not just because of the whole game ownership shenanigan that I've been preaching for months, but also because if this game gets patched and they start ruining the flexibility of the game like they did with Storm 4, I will at least have the better version of the game preserved and remembered for years. Because I'm just gonna say this very briefly. Combat wise, this is probably the best Storm game that exists. It's not the most innovative, I still believe a lot of it could have just been balance patches in Storm 4, but fuck, they're good changes. The combo freedom in this game is unlike any of the previous ones. For the first time, I felt excited to lab with this game, playing around in practice mode and trying out some combos. But it's not just that, it's also them introducing damage scaling, increasing the stun of throwable items, introducing a timer instead of limiting them in numbers, nerfing the substitution recovery period, requiring supports to replenish the full gauge in order to character switch. I fucking like these changes. But I'm not going to go into too much depth, partially because some of these changes are going to require some time before I can settle on my thoughts. I want to wait until the meta evolves and I have a bigger picture on how good or bad these changes are. For the time being, I would like to primarily focus on the quality of the story campaign, because that's something that's not going to change. Now, I'll be upfront, the only thing that really matters here is the special story mode. I would rather not bring up history mode, but just for the sake of transparency, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. This mode fucking sucks. It's essentially just a combination of Hero's History from Ultimate Ninja 3 and the story mode from Storm Generations. I'm a bit more willing to give this mode more credit because at least not every fight here is just free battle with voices. They do have some boss battles which makes it a bit more exciting, but my main problem is that the boss battles are just recycled from the previous Storm games, so I don't know why I would ever bother playing this. There are only 3 scenarios where I can imagine one preferring to play this. A, you don't have the previous Storm games, which seems odd to me. They're not hard to find. I still find copies of the trilogy and Storm 4 on retailers, and you can just buy them online. B, you want to re-experience the boss battles with the mechanics from Storm Connections, which I can somewhat understand that, especially if we take into account the 60 FPS, because the Storm trilogy did get released on PC and they run at 60 FPS, but they break the timing of the quick time events, so you end up being forced to play them at 30 FPS. The final reason would be if maybe you just didn't want to re-experience those campaigns and just wanted an abridged compilation of the iconic moments from the Storm Legacy. Now, for me, none of those reasons matter. Ultimately, I would much rather replay the previous games, especially when they offer blatant advantages. Things such as build up before the boss battles, some amount of story adaptation in order to add narrative relevance to those fights. You know what I can't experience in history mode? Depressed Naruto walking around Konoha. If I can't experience little moments like these, then the boss battle between Naruto and Pain matters way less. This to me is no different than just opening the old games and individually revisiting those boss battles, which you can do, by the way, if you don't want to revisit the entire story mode. Not only that, they're better because at least they have quick time events that actually require you to get it right. Unlike with recent CyberConnect 2 games where they've made it so if you get the button wrong, you can still progress. Also, this doesn't apply to me, but apparently they redid the voice lines for the English dub, and it sounds a lot worse. Like, a lot fucking worse than the original recordings. So yeah, history mode is the most soulless thing CC2 has ever farted out of their own ass, and it honestly makes it harder for me to feel bad for them when people start calling this a pointless cash grab. It's a terrible mode and a waste of time for everyone. So for the sake of having any relevant discussions, let's talk about something that actually is new, namely the special story. Now, initially when this game was announced, I was pretty disappointed by the fact that they weren't going to do a Storm-style adaptation of the BORUTO material, and that we would instead be seeing a game original story. But over time, I started to kind of warm up to this idea, especially because this isn't the first time they've done game original stories, and their previous times weren't even really that bad. The Black Shadow arc from Ultimate Ninja 4 was fairly decent, the Phantom Fortress was kind of okay, even if the mission design was utterly tedious and monotonous. To this day, I can't get over just how repetitive that game is. I like Ultimate Contest from Ultimate Ninja 3, Mecha Naruto from Storm Revolution was kinda meh, and I've never bothered to play whatever the fuck we got from Ultimate Ninja 2. But for Storm Connections, I was a bit more optimistic and was honestly what I mainly wanted to play. After completing it though, I have to say that it was, I mean, if I'm being charitable, I'd say it's somewhat passable, although for a more honest opinion, it's kind of mid, and frankly, a huge downgrade from the previous works. Now, before anything, there's something that I would like to briefly comment on. This isn't even a CyberConnect 2 exclusive issue. This is actually something that I've been witnessing for a long time. It seems to be more common with anime games is what I've noticed. So, Naruto Storm Connections is a cross-gen game, meaning that this was released for both previous and current generation of consoles, and oftentimes you'll get a free PS5 upgrade or smart delivery feature if you buy the old gen copy. Alternatively, if you buy it digitally, you'll get both versions available on your account. More often than not, there tends to not be a lot of difference between both versions aside from visual improvements, faster load screens, DualSense features, and maybe some minor additions of features. Not that I can think of any amongst the ones I purchased. Now, I personally am not bothered by this. Granted, I kind of understand why some people have argued that the newer consoles are being held back by these cross-gen releases, as they're not using the full capability of the newer consoles. And while that might be true, at the same time, a lot of anime games I feel like wouldn't take that much advantage of newer hardware anyway. I mean, a lot of games that I played on my PS4, I could swear they would pass off as PS3 games. Some of them literally were PS3 games. So while I'm not particularly bothered by this, there is one consistent side effect that I've noticed countless times. And again, this seems to happen especially with anime games. Whenever there are pre-rendered cutscenes, they seem to always reuse the same one, as in, they don't make two different pre-rendered cutscenes with the appropriate resolutions and frame rates to match the respective consoles. So as a result, I'll play a game on my PS5 at 60 FPS, 1440p or higher, but then whenever it plays a pre-rendered cutscene, it's usually like 1080p, 30 FPS. This happens all the time with cross-gen games, and it kinda ends up ruining those cutscenes, which are often the best animated ones. And let me tell you something, Storm Connections is a fucking beauty to look at. This shit runs with a smooth frame rate, clean 4K resolution. I don't even think they're using an upscaler. I mean, if they are, it wouldn't surprise me because upsampling technology has improved a lot in recent years. But I wouldn't be able to tell from the images that I see when I play this game. This shit burns my eyes with how sharp it is during daylight scenes. The anti-alien scene is a lot better on the PS5 compared to even on the PS4. And the quality of the animation is also really good, especially during those pre-rendered cutscenes. CyberConnect 2 outdid themselves when it came to the character expressions. The tear-dripping animation has improved quite a bit since the early Storm days. This is what I look for, which is why it's tragic whenever I see the pre-rendered cutscenes not being rendered at the max image quality that the PS5 is able to render this game at. I mean, sure, if you're playing this with a 1080p monitor, you're probably not even gonna be affected by this because the image is going to look comparatively sharper, but for someone like me who connected my PS5 to a 4K monitor, the cutscenes look relatively blurry. It's inevitable, there's a huge gap in the pixel count, the cutscenes look great, and I'm able to appreciate them, but I'm also bogged down by the inferior image quality. It's not even just the pre-rendered cutscenes, some of the UI elements are also rendered at a lower resolution. Like the character HUD, aside from being cartoonishly larger than the previous game, it's also rendered at like 1080p or whatever the fuck, so my screen ends up being plastered with blurry UI elements. It almost feels like I'm playing on a fucking emulator. But I digress. I think I've ranted enough about this. Gaming companies, I beg you, can you at the very least re-render those assets or find some mechanism to upsample them with the appropriate image quality for the platform you're releasing them for? You're not remastering older games, you're literally releasing them at the same time, so don't give me the excuse that you don't have access to the original assets anymore. Yes you do, and you know that. But anyway, let's get back to talking about the story. Now, the reason why I believe that this is a downgrade is that CyberConnect 2 over the years has been pretty hit or miss when it came to improvements with the story campaigns. For example, during the Storm era of the Ultimate Ninja series, they severely downgraded the open world exploration compared to the PS2 games. They compensated this with the improvement in the visual presentation and the inclusion of boss battles that explore different mechanics and even utilize them for narrative purposes. Storm 3 took the Storm 2 formula and improved it even further with better presentation, mob battles, and probably the most epic final battle in the franchise. Storm 4 regressed in certain areas, and some of those ended up being present in Demon Slayer Hinokami Chronicles, mainly the fact that the quick time events were remarkably easier and less integrated into the battles, which ended up making them less intense. But Demon Slayer was such a notable improvement in the audio-visual presentation, with real-time cutscenes being more and more comparable with the pre-rendered cutscenes, and the matches were a lot more diversified. Even non-boss encounters had their own unique fighting styles, and didn't feel like you could just replicate them in free battle. This mode in Storm Connections, on the other hand, I feel like it's just worse at almost everything. For starters, this has no open world exploration. Now normally this wouldn't be something that would seriously affect me, especially because the previous Storm games weren't really doing a lot of innovative stuff in this department, but the reason for why I think that in this case it does hurt the game is because there are some aspects of this mode that I feel like were very obviously designed with the intent of being experienced in an open world environment. For example, one of the things that I noticed immediately was that the real-time cutscenes looked very stilted. They didn't have the expressiveness and scene composition of what you would expect from a normally directed scene, and don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be a huge bitch when it comes to this because frankly speaking, I don't have the highest expectations when it comes to video game cutscenes, especially for anime games. Like, my standards are so low for anime games that as long as there's a speech bubble, that's already enough for me. But in this case, the reason for why it did kind of bother me is that these real-time cutscenes remind me a lot of the types of cutscenes that I would see in the previous Storm games when I would move from one point to another, or when I interacted with a character in order to advance the plot. Like, the stiltedness was kind of just a part of the open world render, and it all kind of fit adequately. But with this mode, it just feels like something is missing. It kind of reminds me of Storm 3, when you revisit the story through the world timeline menu instead of resetting the entire progress. It just kind of feels like half of the experience is taken away. This isn't an issue with Storm 4 because the cutscenes are either pre-rendered or anime stills, so it doesn't really feel unfit when it doesn't include an open world. But it's not even just with the presentation of the cutscenes. There's a point in the story where BORUTO was instructed to ask a few people around if they were experiencing any headaches, and after he finished talking to them, a dialogue plays where he affirms that he has garnered enough info after talking to people. This feels exactly like the type of dialogue that would play after interacting with NPCs as part of a mission. And even in terms of the pacing of the story, there are a lot of transitional lines and shots before characters would go to specific locations, to the point where it ended up introducing a lot of fluff into the story. There are so many scenes with little moments of dialogue that just kind of feel redundant, but once I started to contextualize them as scenes before it would transition to an interactive world, it suddenly makes a lot more sense. But probably the biggest red flag is the fact that the dialogue boxes have a volume icon indicating that the dialogue is voice acted, meaning that at some point this was supposed to not have non-speech dialogue. Now, where do you find these? I don't know. In side quests? NPC interactions? All things found in an open world environment. I believe this mode was meant to have one, but it probably got removed at some point, which further adds credence to the theory that this game was rushed, and I do believe it did negatively impact this mode. Aside from the pacing, it also feels less interactive, especially when it generally doesn't have that many exciting matches. Now, as far as the mission design, I'll be upfront. If you're expecting CC2 style story modes, I just want to let you know that this mode doesn't have a lot of boss battles. You'll get one at the very beginning, but after that, a lot of the fights are just one round regular free battle matches. You can even pick the character that you want to play, which is already a pretty big downgrade from Demon Slayer, where every match was unique and distinct from free battle matches. Now, in fairness, I wasn't too bothered by them because I ended up kind of using them as opportunities to try out characters and become more familiar with the game, since this was my first time playing it. Although I can't imagine having this same effect on the second round, this doesn't seem like a very replayable mode. I frankly don't feel excited by the idea that I might revisit this in the future. The only thing that would truly bring me back to this mode is the story, because I actually like it. Now, full disclosure, this is a game original story, don't expect this to be as good as manga material, and this game does introduce some additional lore that ends up having some questionable implications, but at the end of the day, I don't really care that much. It's a game original story. I'm not gonna treat this as seriously as manga or anime material. Really, as long as it's able to keep me mildly invested and amused, that's all I can really ask for. And I was genuinely interested in the story. Nanashi is a great character. From the very beginning, she had that aura of mystique. She was established as being a guy character for the virtual reality video game Ninja Heroes, and initially she had that robotic reporter voice, but then the more Boruto kept pestering her, suddenly she had a much different attitude, one of being annoyed. There was a bit of mystery behind her true nature, as supposedly, with her being a guy character, you would expect her to be an AI-powered NPC, and she was even described as changing her behavior based on the player interacting with her. But the way she spoke and talked to Boruto and later other people, it was clear she had a human side, and more than likely was being controlled by a human. Then as the game progressed, her true identity was revealed, and there was just something really cool about seeing her shift in appearance, in which she was initially shown to be a blue-eyed pink-dressed girl with blonde hair, but then once it was revealed that she was an Uchiha, we saw her true outfit, and man, she looked like she came straight out of the clan. The dark eyes, dark hair, and darkened blue high collar long sleeve coat. It was really cool seeing a spinning image of a member of the Uchiha clan. And her backstory was great. I think it really encapsulated that dark tone of the Warring States period, back when children were expected to go to war and the average life expectancy was 30 years old. And Nanashi in particular was abused and exploited beyond belief as a young child, due to how she had a special ability that gave the Uchiha a military advantage, and you can see the huge contrast between back then and the current days, back when the philosophies of Zabuza and early Naruto was standardized, the idea that a shinobi was a mere tool or weapon. I cannot stress just how CyberConnect 2 really nailed the facial expressions, as during the last chapter when Boruto went back in time and she found Nanashi caged up, when you looked at her face, you could see her eyes dried up, or better yet, the shift in her expression when one of the Uchiha members called her and how she was slowly backing away as they kept threatening her. When I looked at that, it legit got to me because she was behaving like someone who was clearly abused. And when I look back at all of this, it's no wonder she resented the shinobi role this much. But it also makes me understand why Boruto has such an impact on her positively, because he was likely the first person that actually treated her like a goddamn human being, and all of this while she was essentially a child. Also, CC2 really took a page out of their Demon Slayer work. Those beautiful fire effects with the vibrant colors came straight out of Hinokami Chronicles. There's a good story in this mode, and I feel like there's more I could say regarding the parallels and thematical undertones, but unfortunately, to get through the good part, you have to slog through a lot of less than exciting stuff. Like, at some point, you meet Toneri, and he gives you missions where you revisit past battles, which also include the BGM from classic Ultimate Ninja games. This was essentially just snippets of history mode, except these ones didn't even have boss battles, aside from the fact that they had bigger health bars. Like, I'll be honest, this mode was very disappointing, and following this, I honestly can't say I have much faith in CyberConnect 2 creating compelling story campaigns anymore. I mean, the issues I had with some of the recent games, namely Storm 4 and Demon Slayer, are still there. In fact, they're worse, because the issues I had with Demon Slayer as an example is that I felt like they severely toned down the quick time events. In Storm 2 and 3, quick time events were used to masterfully transition between stages, and there was actual tension behind them, as failing the QTEs would not allow you to progress in the match and would lower your health bar. In Demon Slayer, at times QTEs were only available at the very end of the battle, and even then you weren't even required to accurately match the button on screen. Even if you failed, you would still progress. But with this special story in Storm Connections, they don't even have quick time events anymore, and the opponents aren't even that difficult to beat, especially when the game just outright tells you where they will land their attacks. Coupled with their continuous negligence in building an interesting open world to explore, with this story mode not even having one, at this point, my expectations are at an all-time low. There was a time when I probably would have been excited by the idea of a Storm 5, not that I think that's ever gonna happen, especially after this production fiasco. But if this is the type of experience I'm supposed to be expecting, one where they just keep taking steps back on what used to be their previous strengths, I just can't feel excited anymore, which sucks because in terms of the storytelling and visual spectacle, they're not washed up, they're better than they've ever been. But when it comes to the structure and design of the missions, they're at their absolute worst, and I can't tolerate this anymore. It's hurting the experience for me, And it's not fun anymore, it's not exciting, it's frankly disappointing, especially because I felt like with DBZ Kakarot and Demon Slayer, while neither of those games have perfect campaigns, I have my fair share of issues with them, especially DBZ Kakarot, but it felt like they were going somewhere. With Demon Slayer, they took notes from DBZ Kakarot when it came to boss opponents lashing out strings of diverse attacks. Every match, including random encounters, had unique movesets, and for the first time they incorporated anime soundtrack by composing renditions of some of the anime OST. They seemed like they were moving forward, but with this game, it honestly feels like a combination of everything they've been doing worse in recent years, and I can't take it anymore. I'm gonna have to start being a lot more harsh with this studio, especially because I know they can do better. I've seen them do better. This is not CC2 at their best, and yeah, the story mode, it's pretty mediocre. I'd probably put this above Mecha Naruto and maybe even the Generations one because neither of them offer anything of value to me. I know some people like the story mode in Generations, but look, if I want to watch exclusive anime cutscenes, I'll go to YouTube. This one from Some Connections is more valuable just because it at least has some boss battles, and I like the story quite a bit. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say. CC2, Bandai Namco, you need to get your shit together. This is not acceptable, and you know this. But yeah, I think that's all I have to express. On the brighter side, I heard the netcode is better, so competitive heads might have a bit more fun here, but it's still missing custom matchmaking, so yeah, good luck with online tournaments. Anyway, I think I'm done. Hope you have a good day.